man's dominion. Bracton's teaching is consistent with the declaration of Romans 13, which openly teaches that the powers of government are to operate as the minister of God.
Romans 13 does talk about the civil magistrate being the minister of God. The word used there is diakonos. It means servant. So magistrates are not to be servants to the divine state. They are to be servants to God himself. Yes, they may take an oath to the country in which they serve, but that's understood in the context of there's a higher authority, God himself.
During the American Revolution, it was understood that this principle applied to King George, yet part of the conflict was with the powers of Parliament in England.
The tyrant was Parliament itself, sitting there in England, making laws for the colonies when they had no authority to make laws for the colonies. In fact, when you read the writings of the founders, they repeatedly appealed to King George because they had a charter from the king giving them autonomy in the country called America. And so, but George wouldn't interpose. He wouldn't stop Parliament from doing what they were doing. In fact, he would actually aid and abet them regularly in order to accomplish what they were doing because he kind of liked it, you know. But the main tyrant was Parliament itself. It was not King George. But George's responsibility was interposition. And this is what Patrick Henry talked about. He was to interpose against the British Parliament on behalf of the American colonies, and he didn't do it. And what ended up happening? A bloody civil war.
In 1764, another great minister of law, James Otis Jr., published a work titled The Rights of the British Colonies Asserted and Proved, in which he wrote that to say that Parliament is absolute and arbitrary is a contradiction. The Parliament cannot make 2 and 2 equal 5. Parliaments are, in all cases, to declare what is good for the whole, but it is not the declaration of Parliament that makes it so. There must be in every instance a higher authority, God. Should an act of Parliament be against any of his natural laws which are immutably true, their declaration would be contrary to eternal truth and consequently void. The concept of God's natural law is contained in the opening words of the Declaration of Independence and was written about by Sir William Blackstone, one of the most influential legal minds during the time of the American Revolution.
Now, William Blackstone was probably the preeminent English jurist of his day. He wrote his famous 4-part commentaries on the laws of England, which were published beginning in 1765. Blackstone's commentaries were in the colonies and read by people that read law and particularly wanted to be informed of English law. In his first volume, he introduces the reader to the study of law, and he has important statements about the foundations of law itself. Where did English law come from? What is the nature of English law? What is its grounding? He basically says, look, English law is based on the laws of nature and of nature's God. He uses that exact term that was be later incorporated into the Declaration of Independence.
In his famous commentaries, Blackstone wrote the following on the relationship between God, man, and the rule of law.
Man, considered as a creature, must necessarily be subject to the laws of his creator. And consequently, as man depends absolutely upon his maker for everything, it is necessary that he should, in all points, conform to his maker's will. This will of his maker is called the law of nature. This law of nature is binding over all the globe in all countries and at all times. No human laws have any validity if contrary to this. The doctrines thus delivered we call the revealed or divine law, and they are to be found only in the Holy Scriptures. Upon these two foundations, the law of nature and the law of revelation, depend all human laws. No human laws should be suffered to contradict these.
All of the founders, when you read their writings, who talked about the laws of nature and the law of God, used them synonymously. Often they made quotes where they used them together. That's how we know that. They viewed natural law, or the laws of nature, to be synonymous with the law of God itself, with the special revelation of Scripture itself.
You can't go anywhere in God's world without seeing what God has imparted to us in terms of the rules of behavior that govern us. That was the notion, affirmed by the Holy Scriptures itself, Romans chapter 1, as well as Psalm 19 for 2.
You see that with James Wilson, who was one of the first Supreme Court justices placed there by George Washington himself. You see that with Thomas Paine. It's over and over again you see that the founders all understood this presupposition, that the laws of nature were synonymous to the written law of God, to the special revelation of Holy Writ.
Well, the way